feel like we're right to choose this one. Of course, it's going to be the Sunday night game. It's going to be everyone's eyes on it. Tej, will I be writing a little bit during commercials? I may have to, but that is for a future me. Tej, let's start with the Lions offense versus the Rams defense. Of course, the Lions offense has Ben Johnson calling plays there, stats and scheme coordinator of the year on the offensive side. And I love this offense for so many reasons. It's an easy one to fall in love with because they really understand how, when, and why to attack the middle of the field. The middle of the field for the defense, it's such a money zone for offenses that can access it because you're conflicting linebackers constantly. Your quarterback is getting that ball over the middle where Goff is happy to throw those in-breakers over the middle. And of course, from a receiver standpoint, the Lions have Amon-Ra St. Brown, and most teams aren't building their whole entire receiver room around their slot. But it feels like Ben Johnson deserves even extra praise for really doing so much to maximize that spot. Of course, they love to run the ball. They will get multiple tight ends. They'll throw a fullback on the field. They're going to play under center a ton. One of my favorite tendencies, just looking at them in third down and 4 to 6, and then third and 7 to 10. They have really, really high run rates across the league in terms of usage. And you can do that because if you're an offense that gives yourself 4 downs, you can sneak in some of those. So I really, really love the aggressiveness. There's just so many good things to say here about the Lions offense.
You touched on so many good points there that I also had on my overview of the Lions offense. They are top 10 in both pass offense and rush offense. And I do think that centers around the offensive line and what Ben Johnson is able to do with that offensive line and with some of the weapons that they have. And like you mentioned, they do like to establish the run a lot. And they have a low average depth of target when they pass. They like to use play action. They like to use motion. So they hit all the right buttons there. And they're third in EPA per pass when passing into the middle of the field, which I think is a testament to how that offense is schemed up in the pass game, but also Goff's ability to hit those inbreakers like you brought up. And St. Brown and Sam Laporta are both studs in their position group. And so getting them the ball early and often is going to be important for them in every game this season, and especially this one against the Rams.
I'm glad you mentioned weapons overall because, Jim Harbaugh had this quote where he was like, we see Joe all as a weapon. Penei Sewell is actually a weapon in the run game. And Ben Johnson weaponizes him where you're going to see Sewell pulling across. You're going to see Sewell blocking down with leverage. You're going to see him kind of fake like he's blocking that defensive end and now kind of bump out into space where you have Jahmyr Gibbs getting even a bigger run up on the way to the outside. So it's a team that they're going to attack every single gap in the run game. They will lead with zone, but obviously have a ton of gap schemes in a league that wants to play light, that wants to keep those 2 high shells. So it's a unique offense in ways, but also feels like this is the quintessential modern offense where next year we'll have the same conversation as we did this year about what team is Ben Johnson going to be the head coach of.
Exactly. I think that, yeah, like you said, he does so many things right, and he just has the diversity from a run concept perspective to make it hard for defenses to prepare for them within a week with the time constraint that they have there. And in the pass game, the most impressive thing I think with him is how often there is a pass catcher that's just open on third down, especially longer third downs where last year that was Josh Reynolds a lot of the time, or even Sam Laporta at times, where he kind of knows how defenses will treat St. Brown on those third downs. And so he's able to use some of his best concepts for some of the secondary receiving options to get open there. And I think that was so huge for the Lions offense last year, is not only being good on early downs, which they were, but also having some more juice on late downs to be able to convert those in situations that a quarterback like Goff usually isn't as good as in when they're expected to pass.
I like that because my focus for coordinators across the league this year is really how good of a problem solver are you? And then how good are you at understanding the tempo, the flow of play calling? Where, Tej, I have to bring up Mike McDonald because we're contractually obligated to on this podcast, but I mentioned his superpower is he really, I think, understands when the offense is going to come out and this is what's going to happen. This is the defense that we need to call. So he has a great timing of when to call a blitz or when to kind of hang back in coverage. I think Ben Johnson shares that trait in that he knows when to scheme up that little tight end kind of leaking out across the formation when he can feel those linebackers really, really wanting to kind of bite on that play action. And then, if teams want to devote a little bit more to Amon-Ra St. Brown, which I certainly would, that guy is awesome. He understands when and how and why to use Jameson Williams, I think, in different ways, where that Bucks game was one example. And I think that towards the end of the season in the playoffs, we saw it a little more, but certainly this offense is going to hope for a little bit more from Jameson Williams.
Jameson Williams is the key for this offense to be a borderline top 8 offense to like one of the top 3 offenses in the league. Like I mentioned, you lose Josh Reynolds, who was a pretty good receiver last year for the Lions. And so you're hoping for a big jump from Jameson Williams in year 3, where he was injured in year 1. He started the season suspended in year 2. So while it's not often that a receiver that has been as unproductive as he's been breaks out in year 3, he has the circumstances where you can talk yourself into it. And so what the Lions do from a Jameson Williams, Khalif Raymond, bring in Tim Patrick in, like how they kind of figure out their receiving options after St. Brown and Sam Laporta, who should have almost a 40 to 50% target share, will be really interesting. And I think that's why you really trust Ben Johnson to scheme up those secondary receiving options. But if they're not able to get open, there is a left tail for the Lions offense that can be stretched out a little bit just because they're not able to find anyone outside of the top 2.
I think Ben Johnson would be happy if Jameson Williams just ends up being Will Fuller. Obviously, you want him to stay healthy and play a lot of games, but go ahead and stretch that field, because if you don't have outside receiving, just one-on-one winners constantly, if your coach can scheme that up, then you're maybe able to get away with a lot there. Tej, let's flip it over to the Rams defense before we look at the direct matchups. Of course, Chris Shula comes in as the defensive coordinator, and the biggest departure is, of course, maybe in the league, is Aaron Donald there, where they were able to play a lot of 5-down fronts comfortably with one linebacker, that penny front, because Aaron Donald could just eat up space, eat up blockers, and eat up quarterbacks, eat up pressures on the stat sheet. So he was so incredible in so many ways that we will never allow that to go unremarked upon. But the impact that you can have by having a Hall of Fame defensive tackle, it can literally shape your entire defense, where now you can play with your linebacker can play a little bit faster because that defensive tackle is going to really push that ball one way. Or, you can feel more comfortable playing with those 2 high safeties, not even having to rotate someone down all the time, because that we can be -1 on the line of scrimmage, or between the line of scrimmage and the linebackers, and feel like you can make a play. So this is a defense that, like I said, light boxes, 2 high shells, even against 12 and 21 personnel, which certainly the Lions will trot out a ton this game. This is a defense that wants to be in that sort of, you think about it, the Fangio mold of that light box, 2 high shell, where even if box counts, they can be kind of wonky for a few reasons. This is a team where you're not going to see a ton of players kind of crowding in that box area.
Yeah, and this is the Rams defense that exceeded preseason expectations last season, and it's going to be hard to do that again without Aaron Donald. I think that having him there was a big equalizer for getting a lot of the younger players that they had starting into the right positions, and knowing that he could be an eraser for some of the mistakes that these rookies are going to make. So now you have 3 rookies starting for your defense this year, with 2 of them on the defensive line with Jared Verse and Braden Fisk. And then you also have Omar Spites, the undrafted free agent linebacker from LSU, projected to start in as linebacker for you this year. And like you mentioned, they will have more 2 linebacker sets because of how they have to change some of their defensive front. So that'll be really interesting to follow. But when you look at their coverage ability right now, they were better in zone coverage than man coverage last year. And I think that makes sense based on some of the players that they have, like Russ Yeast and Kobe Durant. And then now you bring in Cam Curl and Darius Williams to really solidify that secondary. So I could see the secondary being decent just because of the players that they have there. But the front 7 in particular is going to take some projection, and we'll really have to see the evolution of it throughout the season.
And of course, they don't have Ernest Jones anymore. There, he got traded along to the Tennessee Titans. And I agree that there is certainly projection that you have to make when you're looking at this defense between Verse and Fisk, and even Turner and Young after strong rookie seasons. But I do think there's boom potential on this defensive line, where if they're in those 5-down fronts a lot, you're getting man-to-man blocking from a defensive line versus offensive line perspective a lot. And if we're able to create pressure, that of course takes pressure off your secondary. But man, if it takes a little bit for some of these rookies to really get things going, whatever coverage you're playing, it can certainly be a long day for the defense.
I agree. I think that the time to pressure is going to be so important for the Rams this season. Like we talked about, they are probably going to be playing a decent amount of zone coverage. So not letting the pass catchers kind of settle into the zones or the pockets that are open and being able to get pressure on the quarterback is going to be huge. And they do have some exciting young pieces there as well as the rookies that they brought in. But I just think it's going to take some time into the season for them to make it work. I don't know necessarily what the picture will look like in week one.
All right, let's start to think about now when the Lions have the ball against the Rams defense. Did a little overview there of the Lions offense and Rams defense heading in. Of course, we'll be able to get a lot of good information in week one, and so many things are game plan specific. So when we're thinking about the Lions offense versus the Rams defense, where does your head go first in terms of the best matchup for the Lions offense?
I think the best matchup for the Lions offense in this game is Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta on the Rams linebackers. I think that when you look at those two pass catchers and where they can do a lot of their damage and where the Rams are weakest at their defense right now, I think that's like kind of where you find the matchup there. And the Rams are actually pretty good at defending middle of the field passes last year. They ranked 13th in EPA per play allowed, but a big part of that was Ernest Jones, like you mentioned, who just got traded last week. So you have Omar Spites, who all the reports out of camp have been very positive on him, but he's still a rookie starting in his first ever NFL game and maybe getting matched up on some all pro pass catchers. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And I'm sure that Ben Johnson is going to be all over the middle of the field as a pass game perspective in this game.
What an unfortunate situation as your first game at linebacker to be placed in a situation where you're going to be in a lot of 5-1 fronts. So that penny front, you're really going to be the only linebacker a lot of times. And then you have Ben Johnson there scheming it up. It really feels unlucky because I agree with you. This is the place to look. I just wrote it as Ben Johnson versus the linebackers or linebacker and in some of those fronts where you only have one linebacker there. You know, when you're in that penny front, when you're in that 5-1 look, it can make you maybe not predictable, not the right word, but there is a more limited coverage menu that you get from that. A lot of times, you know, you're dropping a defensive end into pass coverage. If the offense, you know, starts in kind of a trips or a bunch look to one side, you motion Amon-Ra St. Brown over to the left side. If your nickel doesn't follow there, then I mean, now you're walking out an edge rusher kind of onto Amon-Ra St. Brown, which no one wants that. Maybe except for Lions fans, but would want to see a ton of that. So I agree. This is the place to look. If you're that one linebacker, you know, is it a situation where now the Rams are saying, we're going to push that safety down into the box, rotate him down there to help with that play action so we can let that middle linebacker, really the only linebacker in that look, play a little bit faster. But I think it just throughout the entire game, you're going to have to figure you're probably going to put your nickel defender on St. Brown. Who's going to even match up with Sam Laporta, where it really feels like he's a player that had an awesome rookie season. And I think a lot of signs are pointing to him maybe having a great game in this one.
I think so as well. I really do like Sam Laporta in this game from a matchup perspective because of a lot of things that you mentioned there, where when you are rolling out those 5-1 fronts, that's really where the Lions like to throw the ball is into that area that's going to be have a lot more open field than usual. And St. Brown had the highest target rate of any receiver that was not against a cornerback last season. Football Insights did a great graph on that on Twitter. So we'll probably see that again in this game where there's a lot of emphasis on getting him matched up on either the outside linebacker that is supposed to be pass rushing or the inside linebacker that is the one in the 5-1.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think football is like a quote simple game, but sometimes it is simple where Amon-Ra St. Brown is lined up across from a walked out outside linebacker, have him break out and throw the ball. When the cornerback traps in the flat, you can hit the vertical on the outside. So that is going to be a good one to track. And I keep talking about these 5-1 fronts because a lot of defenses use it against the Lions and that 5-1 look. So again, usually your nickel 4-down lineman, 2 linebackers, you have your DBs behind it. Penny keeps that back end the same way where you can have your nickel, your 5th defensive back on the field, but now you're in that odd front where you're closing those B gaps. You can manipulate it just a little bit. I think it helps teams deal with some of the runs that the Lions want to use, but that whole entire like package was really created to deal with 11 personnel and allow you to have that nickel, but now mess around with some of the inside zone looks that teams run from gun. Just you could say that the odd front is closing those B gaps where teams want to attack is a little bit better against some inside zone looks. But man, when teams get heavy, it's always interesting, and it's a lot easier with Aaron Donald. So I think that that's just going to be something that we have to monitor. Tej, let's flip over to the other side where we have the Rams defense. What do you think the best matchup is for the Rams defense? Where candidly, I could see a lot of points happening in this game.
I'm with you there as well, where I don't necessarily know if the Rams have a great matchup in this game on defense in general, but I think that the one would probably be whoever they have covering the Lions wide receiver 3, who's probably going to be Khalif Raymond in this game. Is like, Khalif Raymond is a fine receiver. He can get open at a pretty high rate, but he is a wide receiver 3 for a reason. So if they have Tre'Davious White on him on the outside, or Quentin Lake when Raymond moves inside, like, I think that's a decent matchup for the Rams. And I know we haven't seen Tre'Davious White play a ton since 2021, but he should be starting for them in this game. And if he can get back to 75, 80% of what he was a couple of years ago, like, that is a pretty good corner. So you're just hoping you can see that from him in this game and throughout the season.
Yeah, I think they're signaling the selection when we're saying, hey, the best matchup is kind of against their receiver 3. That's I think not always a positive thing for a defense, because I think it's fair to say I think they certainly understand that the Lions offense has a really, really strong offensive line, has multiple receivers, particularly at that slot and that tight end spot, that are mismatches. Trey White, that's an interesting one, because he had that Achilles injury. You always worry about cornerbacks as they face an injury. How quick can they come back? Are they able to come back at a same speed, particularly when Jameson Williams is such a burner? So maybe that's a situation you get some safety help in there. Tej, let's flip it over to some matchups. Maybe I'll just go with a matchup. I'm just excited to see the Lions tackles versus the Rams edge rushers, where the Lions tackles are so good. Penei Sewell, can't wait to watch you play, bud. And then watch them against, Verson Young, and certainly Fisk as well. And then some of that interior defensive line from the Rams too, where it's just going to feel like two Titan units kind of attacking each other, where maybe the Rams are a few years off from being like an excellent unit at the defensive line spot, where the Lions, I think, are already there. I still think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, that's a great one. Like, building off of that, when the Lions go for their first 4th and short of the year, and you see the push from the offensive line, I think that's going to be so much fun, because we saw that a couple times in the Chargers game last year, where they went for a 4th and 5 and they ran a draw. Just a crazy push from the offensive line. They really seem to rally around those 4th down plays. So I'm excited to see that on the offensive line versus the Rams defensive line as well.
I think overall for this matchup with the Lions offense versus the Rams defense, I really want to be monitoring early on how much passing over the middle of the field is happening for the Lions offense. Is it a situation where the Rams can get a safety down there in those penny fronts, and now that he can take away the middle of the field? How much of that motion and play action is really, really displacing you when you only have one linebacker on the field? And then, when you're dealing with Amon-Ra St. Brown in the slots, maybe it's not a situation where you have kind of a hard bracket where it's like, we are double teaming this player, but it can become kind of that soft zone bracket where, maybe my nickel, or hopefully not my outside linebacker, but maybe my outside linebacker is kind of getting his hands on St. Brown just a little bit and kind of funneling him inside.
So I think you bring up a really interesting point there, where when you run play action against one linebacker versus 2, maybe it has less of an effect. And I think intuitively that would make sense. I could definitely check the bite distance data on that, as we've talked about before. So yeah, maybe play action isn't as effective for the Lions in this game as it usually is against other teams. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how they build off of that. And I think, like, the other thing that the Lions need to account for, and that should be a focus of the Rams, is just getting pressure on Jared Goff. And the difference between Goff when he's kept clean and one of the more efficient quarterbacks in the league to when he's pressured. And even though he doesn't take sacks, he's still not that effective when there's someone in his face. So I think the Rams will try to be doing a lot to get pressure on him. And we just talked about how good the Lions offensive line is. So I think that's a tough task, but if they are able to rush 5 and rush 6 and get pressure on Goff, like, I think that they will definitely have the upper hand on defense just because of that.
Yeah, I've again hard time thinking that this defense really like wins this game. I feel like it's going to be a high scoring game on both sides. But if you get really unexpected high end play from that defensive front, I think that is certainly something that will help out the Rams. Tage, let's flip it over now to the Rams offense versus the Lions defense. The Rams offense, of course, with Sean McVay, they'll be in a ton of 11 personnel, but they're like an 11 personnel makes 12 personnel, where now we have Puka Nacua who can block everyone, and now he's kind of playing like a tight end. And I think you'd rather be in 11 makes 12, and that just means like, okay, we're in 11 personnel, but really it's playing like 12 personnel, as opposed to kind of how teams will want to be in the opposite situation where they're in 12 personnel with two tight ends, and they say, hey, this tight end can kind of play slot receiver, where, you know, maybe he's not as good of a blocker, because like Nacua grades out as one of their best blockers over and over. And of course, they're going to use a ton of motion to really make things look a little bit different, even though when they're running the same concept, they're going to have motion to push you over a gap and help some of their blocking angles. They're going to have you motioning to pull you inside so they can get outside of you, and even as a head start in the passing game. So in the run game, you know, duo is the hot thing for, I feel like, for everyone kind of across the spheres this year. They move away from that wide zone mentality just a little bit. They get you those two double teams. They're running at you. They're shrinking space. That running back is kind of bouncing to the outside. It feels like they're a running attack that they're kind of fine with being a high success rate, lower EPA team.
The high success rate, lower EPA point is huge, because I think that the Rams 2 years ago probably relied too much on explosives, especially when Stafford was still healthy. And that cost them in situations where they were having these longer drop backs that the offensive line wasn't able to hold up for. So now you kind of have this new look offense where they had the second highest motion rate in the league last year. They were very quick time to throw, and Stafford did a great job of avoiding sacks because of that. And they were able to balance having an average ADOT when they had the fifth most yards after catch per reception in the league. And that really helped their late down passing game be very effective. So when you have Puka Nacua, who can do a lot of the things that you mentioned, especially in those money down situations, and then you also have a run game built around Kyren Williams, who was a very effective rusher last year, like there is a path for this offense to be really good this season because of some of the stars and how high level of a quarterback Stafford still is. There are some question marks about the offensive line, but the hope for Sean McVay and the rest of this Rams coaching staff is their scheme coupled with Stafford, Puka, and Kyren Williams can overcome it.
Stafford is he's such a baller. He's a hooper. I love watching that guy play. I still think he has so much left in the tank, and their passing game, they're really, really firm on that pure progression style, where you're going to see Stafford look to the right and go to his first read, kind of move in a little bit to his second read, scan across to the left for his third and fourth read. So a lot of times it kind of doesn't matter a little bit what the defense is doing, because Stafford, or, you know, if you're in a real pure progression passing system, you're not saying, oh, if it's cover two, I'm going here. If it's cover three, I'm going there. Stafford, of course, has the ability to do that, and I think is actually deciphering that because he's played so many just snaps at that position. But their passing offense is really, really sound. I think it allows the quarterback to get to that backside, where early on in the season last year, a lot of times Puka Nacua was on that backside dig. If you're a quarterback that consistently hits that, that's just like a big check mark for me, where you're getting through your progression, you're able to make that throw. And look, that's not a comfortable throw, because you're not throwing it blind, but you are still getting over to a different side of the field where a safety may be driving on that. So it's really an offense and a system that I've loved seeing just all of these kind of Mike Shanahan tree guys splinter off in different ways, because who your players are inform so much about the system. And now McVay has, of course, had Cooper Kupp, and I mean, shout out Robert Woods. Never miss a chance to shout out Robert Woods. But now you have Puka Nacua in that sort of role where he's able to play a blocker in so many ways. He's not playing the slot in the same way that Cooper Kupp is. And then you have Stafford that just like boosts it to its limits.
Right. I think I was really impressive with McVay last season. Or really impressed with McVay last season with how he was able to mold this offense around not only his personnel, but also kind of where the league was shifting to. And we've talked a lot about how we think he's going to continue to evolve it this season with an increased rate of pistol, and the Rams kind of being the team that will lead the pistol increased charge. And I think that we'll see a lot of that in this game on Sunday night. So I think that'll be something really exciting to watch out for, as well as just a healthy healthier Cooper Kupp paired with Puka Nacua after his rookie season, I think can also be really interesting for the Rams as well.
A healthy Cooper Cup is certainly on my wish list for week one. Tage, let's flip over looking at the Lions defense a little bit. I am glad in this matchup that everyone outside of the Rams defensive coordinator is we get 3 out of 4 coordinator or play callers at least returning. Where now we have Aaron Glenn again, where Aaron Glenn wants to play man coverage. He wants to blitz you. He wants to be in one high, and he really wants to get in your face. And it feels like it is so much of an attitude-based defense where that pick of Terran Arnold, I was really happy that he ended up with the Lions because he is in your face, press you until the whistle goes, and then maybe press you even a little bit after that. Of course, you get that versatility of Brian Branch, and then I think emerging players or a defensive line that we can be encouraged about in a few different ways.
Yeah, I mean the emerging secondary I think is going to be really interesting to watch in this game. The Lions had a great run defense last year, but a very bad pass defense. So the entire offseason by Brad Holmes was just spent throwing darts at the dartboard to try to find competent cornerback play. The Lions made the NFC Championship game with Cam Sutton and Kendall Vildor as their two outside starting corners. So now you have Carlton Davis, who you traded for, Tyrion Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw, who you drafted, and then Amek Robertson from the Raiders, who you brought in as well. So you're just hoping that 2 or 3 of those guys can play defensive back for you this year. And so even though the defensive line it gets a high rate of pressure, I think that hopefully the back 7 can start to do their job as well, because teams threw deep on them last year and did so successfully. So when they were able to just kind of move down the field by passing, teams passing them a lot, and it really mitigated the impact of how good the Lions run defense really was. So there has to be some more balance this year with how the Lions pass defense can improve, even if the run defense takes a step back a little bit.
I think the strategy of taking dart throws at cornerback, I think that's smart, right? When we look at cornerback play, because it is so variant year over year. Of course, Patrick Surtain just gets paid and he deserves it. He's at least a top 2 cornerback in the league. People immediately look at it and say, oh, well, like 2 years ago, his numbers were kind of bad. And then Sauce Gardner feels like the outlier where he's able to be year over year over a 2-year span so good. And I'm not sure if you agree, but it feels like that informs the Chiefs a little bit, where the Chiefs, it feels like their strategy is so often, cornerback's going to walk in different ways, and they feel comfortable about drafting a new cornerback, getting someone in there and developing that player, because again, cornerback play is just so volatile year over year.
That's a really good point. Cornerback play doesn't have much of a correlation in terms of a stat like yards allowed per coverage snap year to year. And even top 10 corners often find it very hard to rank top 10 or even top 20 the next season. So the Chiefs have kind of mastered this strategy, like you mentioned, where they'll sell high on corners coming off of great seasons and they'll buy lower on quarterbacks coming off of bad seasons. And I think that was the hope for the Lions as well, with both Davis and Robertson, and bringing them in during the offseason, and then pairing them with younger players that can also play similar roles like Terrion Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw.
Tage, let's look at the matchup more directly of the Rams offense versus the Lions defense. Where do you think the Rams feel really, really confident as their best matchup?
Yeah, we just talked about how we think that the Lions secondary will be improved this year, but I still think it's Puka Nacua versus the Lions defensive backs. And the Rams-Lions game last year in the wild card round, Puka Nacua caught 9 of his 10 targets for 180 yards and a touchdown. He had that 50-yard touchdown. That was the highlight play of the day for him. And so he'll either be facing off against Carlton Davis, who was 121st in yards allowed per coverage snap last season, or a rookie in Terrion Arnold. So that's a very tough matchup for either of them to kind of show that they can play, as a pretty good corner in the league, just because of how good Puka Nacua is.
Yeah, I feel like we mentioned the rookies for the Rams at linebacker on the other side of the ball. Tyron Arnold, who's a player I love. Poor guy, you got to do with Puka and hopefully healthy Cooper Kupp here. And the Rams, they just have so many ways to beat man coverage, where I mean, Puka is fine beating you one-on-one, just like in straight up coverage. They're going to use a lot of motion to get that leverage advantage where, you get that running start, or, you get starting a bunch or a stack where now you're making the defender kind of work through things. And Puka versus the secondary in general, I just can't wait because Puka so many times when they run duo has to kind of dig out that safety. So he's responsible for that kind of secondary support player. When it's Brian Branch and we see the Puka versus Branch, I'm not going to say, oh, like that's super positive for the Rams or the Lions. I think it's just going to be so fun. Like that is something that is going to be so exciting where it's two players who so clearly love football, love the physical aspect of it. And Nakua does an incredible job breaking tackles, and Brian Branch does an incredible job bringing people down. So watching them when they're like literally when Nakua is blocking in the run game is I think something I'm really looking forward to there.
The run blocking for Puka Nakua from you is so on brand. So I love that point there. But we talked about how there's going to be a lot of points in this game in general. But do you see an area for the Lions defense where they have a good matchup in this matchup?
I think, I mean, Tej, I'm looking at the notes here. I actually want you to go here. Why don't you lead off with where you think this is?
So I think where the Lions have an advantage in this game is with Aiden Hutchinson versus the Rams offensive tackle. So we know what Aiden Hutchinson is at this point, fourth highest pressure rate in the league last season. His time to pressure is a little bit slower than most of the high end edge rushers, but he still gets pressure at a pretty decent rate. But for the Rams offense, you have Alaric Jackson, who is suspended for this game. You have Rob Hivenstein, who might not play, which means Joe Noteboom will have to play. And we saw this play out last year in Rams Bengals week 6, where Stafford ended up taking 6 sacks in that game because of Joe Noteboom in the game and in the state of the Rams offensive line. And so I really think that Hutchinson can take advantage of the Rams missing their 2 best tackles in this game.
Yeah, I think a lot. I wanted to make sure I gave you this one because I don't want to just steal that point from you, Tej. You worked hard for that one. A lot of talk about that Rams interior offensive line, them really building that beef up there. And Havenstein, I think he did a little bit of work in practice. I think it was today. So which would have been Wednesday for those of us listening on Thursday. But yeah, we're gonna see there. I think Hutch is gonna get a ton of pass rush reps here, so that's going to be fun. I think that maybe the Rams will also not just attack him necessarily in the run game because you don't have to just run straight at him, but he's going to be a player that is going to be involved in a lot of those run snaps. I do think just not a best matchup, but another just really fun matchup. DJ Reader, it seems like I think he's going to play. I don't know if he's going to play. We'll obviously get more information, but like I said, the Rams beef up that interior. Reader is a player who in Cincinnati did such a good job being flexible as a really, really big guy, like literally flexible where his upper body and his lower body are kind of moving in different directions while he's holding a gap. So that's just another kind of clash where I'm really, really looking forward to that.
That'll be really fun to watch as the Rams interior offensive line, which we talked about last week, is just being like this massive unit of players who are all really good at both run blocking and pass blocking. And then them facing off against Lee McNeil, who I think is one of the more underrated players in the NFL, as well as DJ Reader. Hopefully, as long as he's healthy, I think will be a great matchup to watch there. And it should be, not super similar to what is happening with the offensive tackles versus Aiden Hutchinson and Lions pass rush from the exterior, because I think the interior will be a different story where the Rams kind of have the upper hand there.
Yeah, and even just kind of an extra one here, thinking about the linebackers between Jack Campbell and Alex Anzalone, how much they're going to have to track. I assume Kyron Williams, who's now, I guess, my favorite punt returner or kick returner, as well as some Blake Corum sprinkled in there. But watching those linebackers track that running back on duo where the running back is reading that open gap. And if a linebacker crashes down, now that running back is bouncing out. But if that linebacker, is not able to fill there, that running back is coming straight downhill at you. So watching those guys really, really chase that running back on different plays, I think will be fun. Tej, any other kind of things you want to talk about in terms of maybe how the offense is going to attack the defense, or what we should expect from that point of view?
I think what we should expect is that the Rams will probably end up passing the ball a lot in this game. When you look back at the wild card game last year, they had a plus 10% pass rate over expected, which is 99th percentile. And the Lions should have a good run defense. They were the 3rd best against man or duo run concepts last season, as charted by FTN. So when you look at where the Lions defense is vulnerable, it's still in the pass game, and it's still when they play single high, they are not good at allowing or defending slants. And I think that the Rams were very good at slants last season because of Puka Nakua and Cooper Kupp.
I like those points. I really want to see Sean McVay just make these cornerbacks run a marathon before the snap, during the snap, after the whistle, all of it, where you see Nakua motioning kind of all the way across. And I'm pro Terry Arnold. I really like him as a player and as a prospect. This is a tough ask for any player, and I think that McVay is going to be able to make his life really, really hard. But I also want to see really across the league this year, Tage. I just want to see what teams duo play action looks like. Where if we're going to say, okay, everyone wants to run duo, we want to be physical, we want to be at you, we're fine being high success rate, low EPA. In the run game, at least, you're going to have your play actions look like that. Where I think Kevin O'Connell for the Vikings had a nice one in the preseason, and teams are just going to kind of do that in different ways. And maybe the Rams are then able to get those cornerbacks stuck inside in the run game. Tisha, any notes for thinking about it for the Lions defense? Or after talking about it, I feel like both, or I'm at least saying, like, let's get ready for points. Some thoughts for the defense defending the offense.
Yeah, we do think that there are going to be a lot of points here, but it's kind of similar to what I think the Rams defense has to do, where Aaron Glenn is going to have to dial up some blitzes where he's rushing 5, he's rushing 6, really put stress on the offensive tackles and the reshuffled interior offensive line and just try to send guys at them. And I think like someone like Derek Barnes can be pretty useful in these scenarios. He almost had that safety on Dak Prescott last season with a really good blitz dial up from Glenn. So just more of that type of stuff to really confuse this Rams offensive line as they're still trying to work out some of the things that you usually work out in week 1.
Yeah, I want to see how Glenn deals with his man coverage. Is it a situation where, hey, we're actually just going to bump to the zone coverage that a lot of that cover 4 sort of look that they played against the Chiefs in the opener last season? But if you feel comfortable with one matchup with Kupp and Nacua, maybe you can say, hey, Terry Arnold can play that matchup, and now maybe we can roll